Maybe next year you'll be invited. My sister smirked across the phone, her voice sharp like broken glass, and I just smiled and agreed. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd already stopped begging for a seat at their perfect family table. They thought they were shutting me out, that I was small enough to be mocked, excluded, pitied. But I had learned something they never expected. When you stand outside long enough, you see the cracks in the walls they guard so proudly, and those cracks can be widened. What my sister laughed about so casually that day would one day return, to her like a knife she didn't see coming. I still remember the silence after her laugh, the kind that sits heavy in your chest while you pretend you don't care. I put my phone down gently on the kitchen counter, staring at the chipped mug in my hand, steam curling out like it had something to say but wouldn't. They were all together that weekend, cousins flying in, aunties gossiping, the whole picture perfect. Clan lined up for photos I wouldn't appear in. It wasn't the first time. Birthdays, anniversaries, graduations. Somehow my name always slipped off the group text, and by the time I found out, it was too late. They called it a mistake, a misunderstanding, but patterns like that aren't accidents, they're choices, and my sister Hannah enjoyed reminding me. She was the golden child, the one who never broke curfew, who majored in what mom and dad approved of, who married into money that sparkled just enough to blind them from her cruelty. Me, I was the one who went astray, the one who moved to a smaller town, worked a job that paid bills but didn't impress anyone, who married a man that couldn't compete with Hannah's polished husband. They branded me as the disappointment early on, and Hannah never missed a chance to press her heel into that bruise. What stung wasn't just the exclusion, but how proud they were of it. They took pictures on the deck of the lake house, fireworks bursting in the background, captions about family first on their perfectly curated feeds, and I was nowhere. I'd scroll in the quiet of my little living room, lights dimmed, coffee gone cold, and feel the hollow in my stomach deepen. But hollowness, I've learned, is a dangerous thing. It's a space where resolve can grow, where silence turns into strategy. And so when Hannah laughed that day, when she told me maybe next year I'd be good enough to be invited, something inside me finally clicked into place. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to ask them for scraps anymore. Because while they were busy toasting each other and basking in their self-importance, I was sitting on something they hadn't considered: leverage. You see, family secrets aren't as well guarded as they think. In every carefully posed photo, in every champagne toast, in every hushed conversation, there are cracks. And I had been watching long enough to see where they split. My sister thought she won when she cut me out, but what she didn't know was that I was already holding the match. The thing about Hannah is that she never saw me as a threat. She saw me as the safe one to mock, the shadow that made her shine brighter, and that's why she got careless around me. She'd talk too much after a few glasses of wine, she'd leave documents lying around when I visited, she'd underestimate my silence because she thought it was weakness. But silence is how you learn. It's how you gather. And I had been gathering for years. Every little detail they thought no one noticed. Like how Dad used to move money between accounts before tax season and smile like it was clever instead of criminal. Or how Mom charged luxury vacations to the nonprofit credit card and brushed it off as stress relief. Or how Hannah's perfect husband, the one they worshipped, had a trail of late-night messages that could ruin his shiny career if they ever saw light. And I didn't have to go looking for these things. They landed in my lap because they never considered me worth hiding them from. They thought my presence was background noise. But background noise can record, can observe, can memorize. And while they laughed and excluded me, I was building a mosaic of truths too sharp to ignore. So when Hannah laughed that day and told me maybe next year I'd be invited, she couldn't imagine that I already had the power to make sure there would be no next year for her little reign. She couldn't know that while she held up her wine glass at the reunion and toasted to family. I was writing everything down: names, dates, transfers, screenshots, and I knew eventually the moment would come when all of it would matter. And when it did, she'd choke on the same laugh she used to belittle me. I started small because small actions never raise alarms. I stopped reacting to their digs, stopped defending myself, just nodded and smiled as though their insults didn't land. And the calmer I became, the more careless they grew. Hannah especially, she bragged about their perfect lake house, how It was under her husband's name for tax purposes, how they rented it out secretly for cash. She thought she was being witty, confiding in me like she was tossing scraps to the underdog, but I remembered every word, every date, every rental. I'd ask harmless questions. What app do you use? How do you manage the bookings? And she'd laugh at how out of touch I was, never realizing I was piecing together evidence brick by brick. And it didn't stop there. Mom once left her email open when she went to make tea. I was at her kitchen table waiting for Hannah, and I saw the receipts, donations siphoned to personal accounts, shopping bills disguised as event expenses. I didn't copy anything then, but I memorized where she kept her files, what folders were labeled with what, and later when I had the chance, I gathered what I needed quietly, without a sound, no confrontation, no drama, because drama makes you look bitter, quiet makes you look harmless, and harmless is the most powerful disguise. So by the time Hannah called me with that laugh in her throat, telling me I wasn't good enough to sit at the family table, I already knew that when the moment came to push back, I wouldn't be raising my voice. I'd be raising the documents, the receipts, the files they never thought I'd notice, and it would be too late for any of them to laugh. That summer, while they were all posing in white linen for the family portraits at the reunion, I wasn't scrolling jealously like before. I was sitting in my quiet apartment with folders spread across the table, the hum of the fan filling the silence. And I felt something I hadn't in years. Control. I had printouts of financial transfers with dates that aligned perfectly with their little trips, screenshots of texts Hannah's husband sent to a woman she'd once called her best friend, and I had copies of invoices Dad signed off for consulting services that didn't exist. And it was all there in black and white, not guesses, not suspicions, but proof. Hard enough that if it ever hit the right hands, their entire facade would splinter. And the irony was, they'd gifted me the power themselves. They handed me their secrets because they thought I was irrelevant. And irrelevance is the best invisibility cloak. I wasn't their equal in their eyes. I wasn't even in the room, which made it easy to slip through unnoticed, to take what they left behind. And while Hannah laughed in her floral dress by the lake holding a champagne glass, I knew one day soon her laugh would freeze. Not because I shouted, not because I begged, but because I would let the right person see the right page at the right time. And when that happened, their perfect family circle would break wide open, and I wouldn't have to fight to be invited. They'd be too busy scrambling to save themselves. The turning point came in the fall, when Hannah called me again. Her voice, dripping with that same superiority she'd always carried, telling me about how successful her husband's firm was, how Dad had helped him secure certain clients. And she said it in that half-gloating, half-condescending tone, like she was reminding me where I stood. And I let her talk, because the longer she talked, the more threads she handed me. And when she finally hung up, I sat in the dark with my phone still warm in my hand, and realized the picture was complete. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal had its place. And I no longer needed to wonder if I was crazy, because the proof erased doubt. And when you have proof, you have power. So I took a quiet step they never imagined I'd take. I made an anonymous submission. Nothing loud, nothing traceable, just a neat package delivered to the right department. And I waited. I didn't rush. I didn't check every hour. I just went about my days as if life was unchanged. But inside I knew a storm was coming. And by winter it arrived, subtle at first. Dad's face tighter than usual when he picked up Hannah's calls, Mom avoiding social media altogether, Hannah snapping at me during a holiday phone call, asking if I'd heard anything weird lately, her tone sharp and brittle, and I just said no, playing dumb, because dumb had always been my greatest disguise. And as weeks passed, their perfect posts thinned out, the smiles looked strained, the captions shorter, until one day there were no photos at all, only silence. And I knew the cracks had widened exactly as I'd planned. When the silence turned into whispers, I knew it had landed harder than even I expected. Hannah stopped calling altogether, which for her was the loudest sign of fear. Dad's old business partners began cutting ties one by one. Mom's nonprofit went from posting weekly events to posting vague, "we're restructuring" notices. And then came the moment I'll never forget. Hannah's husband's name in a headline on my phone screen. Not the front page, but loud enough in the local section. Investigation into financial irregularities at his firm, questions about misreported accounts. And I sat at my kitchen table with that chipped mug again, only this time I wasn't staring at it in shame. I was sipping calmly, reading every line, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel excluded. I felt taller than all of them, because they had spent decades making me believe I was less. And yet here I was, holding the one thing they couldn't buy, couldn't fake, couldn't laugh away. Truth. And I didn't send it to gloat. I didn't demand an invitation. I didn't even reveal myself. Because the sweetest revenge is watching the very people who dismissed you crumble under the weight of their own actions. And as they scrambled to patch holes in their crumbling image, I finally understood what freedom felt like. Not a seat at their table, but no longer needing it at all. By spring, the storm was in full force, subpoenas were being served, Dad's accounts were under review, Mom was called in for questioning about her nonprofit's finances, and Hannah, my flawless sister, the golden child, the one who had laughed in my ear about family reunions, was suddenly the face of scandal, her husband's name dragged through mud, her perfect house now the sight of reporters knocking at the door, and through it all, I stayed silent. No one thought to look at me. No one ever does. They were too busy tearing each other apart, blaming, accusing, panicking, and I watched from the sidelines with the kind of calm you only earn after years of being dismissed. I went to work like normal. I paid my bills. I watered my plants. And yet inside, I felt an unfamiliar but intoxicating power humming in my veins, because I had taken back control without ever raising my voice. I had shifted the balance by simply shining a light on the rot they'd been painting over for years. And the irony of it all was that Hannah had created this moment herself. Her laugh, her cruelty, her constant need to remind me that I wasn't invited. It was the very thing that sharpened me, that made me patient enough to wait and watch. That taught me that being overlooked can be the strongest position of all. And now, while they scrambled to protect reputations and hire lawyers, I sat in my little kitchen again, no longer staring at cracks in mugs or in myself, but staring at the truth that had been there all along. I never needed their table, because I had built something stronger, the ability to walk away without regret, and to know that when they finally looked around for someone to blame, the one person they never saw coming was the quiet one they left outside. It didn't take long before the phone calls started again. First from Mom trying to sound casual, asking how I was doing, and slipping in questions about whether I had heard anything unusual. Her voice strained and brittle, and I played my part perfectly, answering softly, keeping my tone flat, as though I was still that same harmless shadow they thought I'd always be. And then Hannah's number flashed across my screen weeks later. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won. Her voice was sharp, unsteady, nothing like the confident laugh she'd used to mock me. She asked if I'd said anything to anyone, if I had repeated things she might have mentioned, her words tumbling too quickly like she couldn't keep them straight. And I let her spin. I told her I didn't know what she meant, that I was sorry she was stressed, and her silence on the line told me she didn't believe me, but she also couldn't prove otherwise. And that's when I knew I had her exactly where I wanted her, not begging me for forgiveness, not apologizing for the years of cruelty, but fearing me in a way she never thought possible. Because nothing unsettles a person like Hannah more than realizing the one they underestimated most holds the sharpest knife. And I didn't even have to use it openly. I just let the truth exist where it belonged, in the right hands, and her own fear did the rest. So while the family splintered and their empire crumbled piece by piece, I stayed exactly where I had always been in their eyes, on the outside. But this time, I wasn't looking in with envy. I was looking down with clarity. By the summer, their empire had collapsed into something unrecognizable. The lake house was no longer a backdrop for champagne and matching outfits, but a liability, whispers about it being seized or sold off under pressure. Dad's name was whispered around town with pity instead of respect. Mom stopped showing her face at church altogether. And Hannah, perfect, polished Hannah, looked gaunt in the few pictures that leaked out. Shoulders hunched, smile forced, the kind of brittle expression you wear when you know everyone is talking about you. And I carried on quietly, no grand announcements, no confessions, just living my life with a peace they could never fake. Because peace built on truth doesn't crack. It doesn't need filters or captions. It just exists. And the irony that none of them could understand was that I hadn't done this out of spite. I hadn't even planned it as revenge at first. I had simply stopped begging and started collecting. And when the time came, the truth handled the rest. It was Hannah who sharpened me, Hannah who fueled the patience and the silence, Hannah who handed me the match by mocking me one too many times. And as I watched her world burn down around her, I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I simply closed the blinds and sat with my coffee because the best kind of revenge isn't loud or messy. It's quiet. It's precise. It's the kind you don't have to announce, because everyone already knows who lit the fire, even if you never admit it. When autumn came, the fallout was undeniable. Lawsuits were filed, names appeared in articles that circulated far beyond our small circle. The same last name I carried suddenly had a weight to it that no one wanted to claim. And while they scrambled to distance themselves from one another, I stayed invisible. The daughter who never mattered, the sister who was never invited, the woman they dismissed as unimportant, and yet I was the only one untouched. Their whispers turned into accusations inside their own walls. Dad blaming Hannah's husband for dragging the family down, Mom blaming Dad for not covering his tracks, Hannah blaming everyone but herself, and the chaos was almost poetic, each of them clawing to survive a storm they had built with their own hands, while I walked to the market, paid my bills, watered my plants, and felt nothing but the strange, quiet satisfaction of finally being free. Because freedom doesn't come from proving them wrong. It comes from no longer needing their approval. And I had reached that place without even realizing when it happened. One day I just woke up and the ache was gone. The longing to be included evaporated, replaced with a clear truth. They had never been a family, not in the way family is supposed to mean. They were a performance, a facade, and I had stopped auditioning. I had walked away with nothing but my dignity intact, and somehow that turned out to be more powerful than all their money and staged photographs. And now, while they traded lawyers and press statements, I sat in silence. Not because I was weak, but because silence was my victory. The kind they could never replicate. The kind that turned their laughter into ash. And when I thought about Hannah's words, "Maybe next year you'll be invited," I smiled for real this time, because there would never be another year like that for her again, and I didn't need to be invited to know I had already won. Winter settled in, and with it came the final unraveling. Dad's business shuttered under investigation, Mom's nonprofit dissolved completely, and Hannah's marriage disintegrated publicly with filings that named her husband's infidelity. And financial misconduct in black and white for anyone to read. The woman who once stood above me like a queen now shrank into silence. No more phone calls, no more smug remarks, no more laughter echoing through my phone. And it was in that silence that I found the loudest vindication of all. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I hadn't thrown tantrums or fought to be included. I had simply let the truth breathe, and the truth had consumed them far more efficiently than anger ever could. And while they lived in damage control, I was finally free to build a life untouched. By their cruelty, I started small. Painting my kitchen, replanting my garden, saying yes to coffee with friends instead of scrolling through family photos that didn't include me. And each small step forward felt like claiming back the years they had stolen, piece by piece, until I could look in the mirror and see someone whole again, not the shadow they had defined me as, but a woman who had survived their exclusion and turned it into power. And the best part was knowing that Hannah would never stop wondering if it was me, if her laugh had sharpened me enough to strike back. She would carry that doubt forever, glancing at me with suspicion whenever we crossed paths. And I'd just smile politely, because the most haunting revenge is not the strike itself, but the knowledge that the quiet one they mocked was the only one who walked away unscathed. The years that followed carried a strange calm, not the brittle quiet of being excluded, but the steady rhythm of a life I had built on my own terms. They tried to mend their image, but it never returned to what it was. Dad aged faster than I remembered, shoulders bent under the weight of investigations. And losses, Mom clung to silence because every word she spoke risked exposing another crack. And Hannah, once the loudest voice in the room, lived in the shadow of what she had lost, her laugh gone, her sparkle dimmed, her name carrying suspicion instead of admiration. And though we crossed paths at rare moments, funerals, obligatory gatherings, I never let her see anger on my face. Only the quiet smile she hated most, because it told her I had survived without. Them. It told her I had no need for their table anymore. And it haunted her more than anything I could have said. And in that haunting lay the truest revenge. Not the destruction I set in motion, but the life I lived afterward. Steady, unbothered, free. And when she looked at me, she would never know what was worse. That I might have been the one who held the match, or that I could thrive without ever needing to touch their flames at all. And either way, the power was mine, not because I destroyed them, but because they could no longer destroy me. I used to think revenge would feel like fire, like shouting in their faces, or finally being invited just so I could slam the door myself. But when it came, it wasn't fire at all. It was water, calm and steady, erasing the years of pain without leaving scorch marks. The family that once defined me had burned themselves down with their own secrets and arrogance, and I didn't need to dance in the ashes. I just needed to keep walking forward. So I did. I built a life filled with people who saw me, not for what I could provide or how well I performed, but for who I was. I let love back in. Not the desperate kind that begs for scraps, but the quiet kind that feels like home. And I found peace in small things. Books, gardens, mornings that belonged only to me. And sometimes when the old ache tried to creep in, when I remembered all the reunions I wasn't part of, I reminded myself that I hadn't lost anything worth keeping, because family isn't a bloodline that shuts you out. It's the people who choose you every day, who open the door without conditions. And in the end, Hannah's laugh, the one that used to cut me open, became nothing more than an echo of her own downfall. She had handed me the very push I needed to stop chasing them and to finally free myself. And maybe she still wonders. Maybe she lies awake at night replaying that call. Maybe she hears my silence on the other end of the line and knows it wasn't weakness at all. Maybe she suspects it was strength, and maybe that's the real revenge, that I don't need to answer, I don't need to explain, I don't need to be invited, because I already stepped into a life where their approval is worthless. And my smile, the one I wear now, isn't the quiet mask they mistook for surrender. It's the proof that I won by walking away whole,